6 months after my wife died, her laptop turned on by itself in the middle of the night. I was asleep in our bedroom. It was 3:07 a.m. The screen lit up the hallway outside her office, a blue glow that crept under the bedroom door like something alive. I thought I was dreaming. I thought the grief was finally breaking me, making me see things, hear things, feel her presence in places where she no longer existed. It was labeled, "If something happens to me." I stared at that folder for a long time. My hand was on the mouse, my heart was in my throat. My wife had been dead for 6 months. She'd died of what the doctors called a sudden cardiac event, a heart that stopped without warning, without history, without explanation. She was 59 years old, healthy, active, no heart problems, no risk factors, just dead on the kitchen floor on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at work. I'd accepted it. I'd grieved. I'd buried her and sold her car and donated her clothes and done all the things you do when the person you loved for 37 years is suddenly, inexplicably gone. But now her laptop was open, and a dead woman was asking me a question from beyond the grave. What if something didn't just happen to her? What if something was done? I clicked the folder. Inside were 47 files. Documents, photographs, audio recordings, bank statements, emails. A timeline spanning 3 years, organized with the precision of someone who knew they might not be alive to explain it. The first file was a video. My wife's face, looking directly into the camera, sitting at this very desk in this very chair. She was calm, steady, but her eyes were afraid. "Raymond, if you're watching this, then I'm gone. And I need you to know that what happened to me was not an accident. I need you to know who did this. And I need you to take everything in this folder to the police. Don't trust anyone until you've seen all of it. Not our children, not our friends, not Martin, especially not Martin. Start with the file called Timeline. And Raymond, I'm sorry I didn't tell you while I was alive. I was trying to protect you. I realize now that was a mistake." Martin. She said Martin. Martin Gale. My business partner of 28 years. The man I'd built a $6.2 million client company with. The man who'd stood beside me at her funeral and cried. I sat in my dead wife's chair at 3 in the morning and felt the world I'd built crack down the middle. Before we go any further, thank you for being here today. If this story already has your attention, take a second and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It truly helps this channel reach more people who need to hear these stories. And a gentle reminder, while this story carries real emotions and real lessons, some names, details, and events have been fictionalized for narrative and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental. The truth behind this message is what matters. Stay with me on this one. The story goes places you won't expect. My name is Raymond Calloway. I'm 63 years old. I live in a house on Lakeview Terrace in Knoxville, Tennessee, a 5-bedroom colonial that my wife, Vivian, and I built in 2004. Not bought, built. Vivian designed it herself. She was a forensic accountant, a woman who spent her career examining financial records for signs of fraud, embezzlement, and deception. She designed our house the same way she examined books, meticulously, with hidden features most people would never notice. The house had a panic room behind her office closet that even our children didn't know about. It had a floor safe under the master bedroom carpet. It had a fireproof filing cabinet built into the basement wall, disguised as a utility panel. Vivian was a woman who believed in preparation, in redundancy, in having a plan for every contingency. I thought she was paranoid. Turns out, she was prophetic. Vivian and I met in 1986 at the University of Tennessee. She was studying accounting. I was studying business. We were paired on a group project that neither of us wanted to do, and by the end of the semester I couldn't imagine doing anything without her. She was brilliant in a way that was almost intimidating, the kind of mind that could look at a spreadsheet and see the story behind the numbers, the way a detective looks at a crime scene and sees what happened. We married in 1988, built a life, had 2 children, our son David, born 1990, and our daughter Claire, born 1993. David became a software engineer in Nashville. Claire became a teacher in Chattanooga. Both good people, both decent. Both about to be dragged into something none of us saw coming. In 1995, I started a company called Callaway Gale Construction with my college roommate, Martin Gale. Martin was the salesman, I was the builder. He brought in the clients, I built their projects. It was a perfect partnership, 2 halves of a whole, each covering the other's weakness. We started small, residential renovations, kitchen remodels, bathroom additions. But Martin had ambition, and I had skill, and together we grew. By 2000, we'd moved into commercial construction, office buildings, retail spaces, medical facilities. By 2010, we were doing $4 million a year in revenue. By 2020, we'd crossed $6 million. The company was valued at $6.2 million, split 50-50 between us. Martin and I were more than partners. We were friends, best friends. The kind of friends who'd been through everything together. Lean years, boom years, fights that nearly ended the partnership, celebrations that nearly ended in arrest. He was the best man at my wedding. I was the best man at his. Our families had dinner together every month. Our children grew up playing in each other's backyards. Vivian never fully trusted Martin. She never said it directly. Vivian was too careful for direct accusations without evidence, but I could feel it in the way she watched him at dinner parties, the way she'd go quiet when Martin talked about finances, the way she'd ask me casually about specific transactions or invoices or payments that seemed routine but, in retrospect, were anything but. "Raymond, did you approve the payment to Apex Materials? $42,000 for concrete seems high for a project that size." Martin handles the vendor relationships. He negotiated the rate. That was Vivian's response when she didn't believe something but wasn't ready to say why. Just, a sound that contained entire paragraphs of suspicion. I'd brush it off. Martin was my partner, my friend, the man I'd built everything with. Vivian was an accountant. She saw fraud the way a dermatologist sees skin cancer. Everywhere. In everything. Professional hazard. That's what I told myself. For years. Vivian died on March 14th, 2023, a Tuesday afternoon. She was in the kitchen making lunch. I was at a job site in West Knoxville. David was in Nashville. Claire was in Chattanooga. Nobody was with her. The medical examiner ruled it a sudden cardiac event. Arrhythmia leading to cardiac arrest. No prior history, no warning signs. The doctor at the hospital told me, "Sometimes hearts just stop, Mr. Callaway. There's no explanation. It happens." I accepted it because what choice did I have? My wife was dead. The autopsy showed no foul play. The medical examiner signed the death certificate. Vivian was cremated, per her wishes, and I placed her urn on the mantel in the living room, next to the photograph from our wedding day. 2 24-year-olds who had no idea what was coming. Martin was devastated. Or he performed devastation convincingly. He came to the funeral. He gave a speech about Vivian that made people cry, her intelligence, her warmth, her devotion to family. He hugged me and said, "Raymond, I'm here for you. Whatever you need. The business, the house, anything. I've got you." I believed him. I had no reason not to. For the first 3 months after Vivian's death, Martin was exactly what he promised. Supportive, present, steady. He took over the financial management of the company entirely, which I was grateful for. Vivian had been our unofficial auditor. She'd review the books every quarter, check the invoices, flag anything that looked wrong. With her gone, someone needed to handle it. Martin volunteered. "Don't worry about the numbers, Raymond. Focus on healing. I'll keep everything running." And I let him. Because I was broken. Because the house was too quiet. Because I'd find myself standing in the kitchen staring at the spot where Vivian had collapsed, and I couldn't remember why I'd walked in there. Grief doesn't just take the person you love. It takes your ability to think, to question, to protect yourself. It takes your sharpness and replaces it with fog. Martin knew this. He was counting on it. The laptop incident happened on September 14th, 2023. 6 months after Vivian's death. I'd been avoiding her office. The room felt sacred, untouched, frozen in the moment she'd last left it. Her coffee mug was still on the desk, a brown ring dried inside. Her reading glasses were folded next to the keyboard. Her sweater was draped over the chair, still holding the shape of her shoulders. I'd closed the door after the funeral and hadn't opened it since. But at 3:07 a.m., the blue light woke me. I walked to the office and found the laptop open, screen bright, the folder glowing in the center of the desktop. If something happens to me... Later, I learned what had happened. Vivian had set up a timed activation, a program that would open the laptop and display the folder exactly 6 months after her last login. She'd configured it the same way she configured everything, meticulously, with redundancies. If the laptop was off, the program would activate the next time it was powered on. If the battery was dead, the program would trigger upon the next charge. She'd thought of everything. Because Vivian didn't just suspect something was wrong. She knew. And she'd spent 3 years building the evidence to prove it. I'll walk you through the folder the way I walked through it that night. File by file. Discovery by discovery. Each one pulling back another layer of the lie I'd been living for almost 3 decades. File 1. Timeline.docx. A 3-year timeline starting in 2020, documenting every suspicious financial transaction Vivian had identified in the Callaway Gale books. Dates, amounts, descriptions, account numbers. Over 200 entries. The pattern was clear. Martin had been siphoning money from the company through a network of shell vendors, companies that existed only on paper, with bank accounts that Martin controlled. He'd create invoices for materials, equipment, consulting services, things that sounded legitimate but were completely fabricated. The invoices would be approved by Martin, who controlled accounts payable, paid by the company, and deposited into accounts that fed back to Martin or his wife, Sandra. The total, as calculated by Vivian over 3 years, $1.8 million. Stolen in increments of $15,000 to $60,000, timed to avoid audit triggers, disguised as normal business expenses. $1.8 million. From the company I'd spent 28 years building. File 2. Shell. Vivian had identified 7 shell companies used to funnel the stolen money. Each one was registered in a different state: Delaware, Wyoming, New Mexico, Nevada. States with minimal disclosure requirements. Each one listed a different registered agent, but Vivian had traced them all back to a single law firm in Atlanta that specialized in anonymous corporate structures. She'd included corporate filings, bank records she'd obtained, I still don't know how, and a web diagram connecting each shell company to Martin's personal accounts or to Sandra Gale's boutique clothing business, which Vivian had flagged as a likely laundering operation. File 3, Sandra.pdf. A dossier on Sandra Gale's clothing boutique, Maison Sandra. The boutique was located in a high-end shopping district in Knoxville. It sold designer clothes at premium prices. It looked legitimate from the outside, but Vivian's analysis showed that Maison Sandra had revenues that were physically impossible for a boutique of its size. The store reported $840,000 in annual revenue. Vivian calculated, based on square footage, foot traffic estimates, and average transaction values for comparable boutiques, that the store's realistic maximum revenue was $200,000. The remaining $640,000 was being pumped in from the shell companies. Martin was stealing from Callaway Gale, funneling the money through shell companies and laundering it through his wife's boutique. Vivian had mapped the entire operation. File 4, medical.pdf. This is where the folder turned dark. This is where my hands started shaking and didn't stop for 3 days. Vivian had documented a series of incidents over the previous 2 years in which she'd experienced unexplained health symptoms, dizziness, nausea, heart palpitations, episodes of confusion. She'd gone to her doctor. Blood work was normal. ECG was normal. Everything was normal. But Vivian noticed a pattern. The symptoms occurred exclusively after events where Martin and Sandra were present. Dinner parties at our house, company gatherings, barbecues. Never at other times. Never when Martin wasn't around. Vivian wrote, "I believe I'm being poisoned. The symptoms are consistent with low-dose exposure to a cardiac glycoside, possibly digoxin or a related compound. Sandra has a background in pharmacy. She worked as a pharmacy technician before opening the boutique. She would have access to knowledge about cardiac-affecting substances and potentially to the substances themselves. My wife believed she was being poisoned by my business partner's wife at my own dinner table." She continued, "I've begun declining food and drink at any event where Sandra is present. I've also started collecting samples, hair, urine, leftover food, and storing them in the basement safe. If something happens to me, these samples should be tested for cardiac glycosides." I stopped reading. I went to the basement. I opened the safe, the fireproof one built into the wall that I'd always thought was excessive. Inside were labeled containers, hair samples in dated envelopes, urine samples in sealed medical vials, food samples in airtight bags, each labeled with the date and event. My wife had been collecting evidence of her own poisoning for over a year, storing it in a hidden safe, preparing for the possibility that the people sitting at our dinner table were slowly killing her. And she hadn't told me, because she knew I wouldn't believe her. Because Martin was my best friend. Because I would have said she was paranoid. Because I would have done exactly what I'd been doing for years, brushing off her concerns, dismissing her suspicions, trusting the man who was stealing from me and poisoning my wife. She'd protected me from the truth because the truth would have destroyed me. And in doing so, she'd faced the danger alone. I went back to the laptop. File 5, audio recordings. Vivian had recorded conversations, 11 audio files. She'd used her phone, placed casually on tables, counters, shelves, the invisible phone that everyone ignores because everyone has one. Recording 3 was Martin and Sandra in our kitchen at a dinner party. Vivian had excused herself to the bathroom. The phone was on the counter. Sandra's voice. "How much longer do we have to keep doing these dinners? I'm tired of pretending." Martin. As long as Raymond's alive and signing checks, we keep showing up. Sandra. And Vivian? She's been watching the books again. She asked me about Apex materials last week. Martin. Vivian's a problem, but she's also a woman with a bad heart. Sandra laughed. Getting worse every month. Martin. These things happen. Hearts stop. Doctors sign certificates. Nobody asks questions when a 59-year-old woman dies of cardiac arrest. Sandra. And if she figures it out before then? Martin. She won't. She's smart, but she doesn't have proof. She has suspicions. Suspicions don't hold up in court. I listened to my best friend of 28 years discuss my wife's death as a business strategy. Casually. Between bites of the dinner she'd cooked them. In the kitchen of the house she'd designed. Hearts stop. Doctors sign certificates. Nobody asks questions. Recording 7 was Martin on the phone in his office. Vivian had somehow placed a recording device. She didn't explain how, but Vivian was resourceful in ways I never fully appreciated. Martin. The Callaway Gale accounts are clean. I've moved $430,000 this quarter through Apex and Meridian. Sandra's running it through the boutique, tax-free on her end. And Raymond? Martin. Raymond's a builder. He builds things. He doesn't count them. That's why I handle the books. What about the wife? Martin. Vivian's being managed. Give it 6 more months. After that, it won't matter.
Being managed. My wife's slow poisoning, described as management. A line item in Martin's theft. An operational detail in the dismantling of my life. Recording 9 was the one that made Detective Kwan pause the audio and leave the room for 5 minutes. Sandra and Martin at their own home. Vivian had, I still don't know how, managed to record a conversation in their kitchen. Sandra. She looked sick at dinner last night. Did you notice? Martin. Of course I noticed. The dosage is working. Sandra. How much longer?
Martin. Her doctor's going to run tests eventually. We need to be done before anything shows up. 3 more months, maybe 4. Sandra. And if she tells Raymond?
Martin. She won't tell Raymond. She knows he won't believe her. She's been trying to tell him about the money for years, and he brushes her off every time. He trusts me more than he trusts her. That's our biggest advantage.
Sandra.
That's sad.
Martin.
That's business.
He was right. About all of it.
Vivian had tried to tell me. The questions about Apex materials. The, at dinner. The careful watching. She'd been signaling for years, and I dismissed every signal because I trusted my best friend more than my wife. Martin knew this. He'd counted on it. He'd built his entire scheme on the foundation of my misplaced trust, and Sandra had called it sad. She'd acknowledged the tragedy of a woman being dismissed by her own husband while being slowly killed. And then she'd continued with the plan anyway. The recognition of cruelty without the impulse to stop it. That might be the worst kind of evil there is. Recording 11, the final recording, was Martin alone in his car. A dashcam audio that Vivian had somehow accessed. He was talking to himself the way people do in traffic, unguarded, unfiltered. 6.2 million. Half of that's mine legally. The other half becomes mine when Raymond falls apart. And he will fall apart. Without Vivian, he can't manage the books. Without Vivian, he can't even manage himself. Give it a year after she's gone. He'll sell me his share for pennies. Or I'll push him out. Either way, Callaway Gale becomes just Gale. The way it should have been from the start, just Gale. After 28 years of partnership, after building a company together from nothing, Martin's endgame wasn't just to steal money. It was to erase me, to take my name off the building, to turn 28 years of shared work into his personal empire, funded by theft, enabled by murder, built on the grave of the woman who'd figured it all out. Files 12-47, the Evidence Archive. The remaining files were meticulous. Bank statements showing transfers from Callaway Gale to the shell companies. Every transaction highlighted, annotated, cross-referenced with invoices that Vivian had verified as fraudulent. Corporate filings for each shell entity, with Vivian's notes identifying the connections between them. Tax records for Maison Sandra showing inflated revenue. Vivian had obtained IRS filings and compared them against her own analysis of the boutique's realistic income. Pharmacy records showing Sandra's employment history and her access to cardiac medications. Photographs of Martin meeting with the Atlanta lawyer taken by Vivian herself from her car on at least 4 separate occasions. She'd followed him. My wife had followed my business partner to secret meetings and photographed them from across the street.
Email printouts between Martin and Sandra, using personal accounts they thought were private. The emails used coded language. The garden project meant the embezzlement. Seasonal maintenance meant the poisoning. Renovation timeline meant the schedule for taking over the company. Vivian had decoded every phrase and annotated the emails with their true meanings, supported by cross-references to the financial records and audio recordings. There were also emails between Martin and the unknown voice from Recording 7, a man named Dennis Archer, the Atlanta lawyer who'd set up the shell companies. Dennis had been Martin's architect, designing the financial structures that made the theft invisible. Vivian had obtained these emails. I later learned she'd accessed Martin's email through a password she'd observed him typing at a company computer and printed every one. And the final file, File 47, a PDF labeled "For the Police." It was a 12-page summary, written in Vivian's precise professional language, the language of a forensic accountant presenting findings to a court. It laid out the embezzlement scheme, the shell companies, the money laundering, and the poisoning. It included a table of contents, an executive summary, and recommendations for investigation. The last paragraph read, "I have spent 3 years investigating my husband's business partner because I love my husband, and I refuse to let him be robbed or harmed. If I'm no longer alive when this is read, I ask that my death be treated as suspicious, and that the biological samples in the basement safe be tested immediately. I believe I've been poisoned by Sandra Gale with the knowledge and participation of Martin Gale. I believe they intend to continue the embezzlement after my death, possibly with the goal of eventually taking full control of Callaway Gale Construction and its $6.2 million valuation. Raymond, I love you. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you. Please finish what I started." I sat at Vivian's desk until dawn. The screen light faded as the sun came up. The coffee mug with the dried rings sat beside me, the reading glasses, the sweater. All the artifacts of a woman who'd spent her last years fighting a war nobody knew about, in a room I'd been too afraid to enter. At 7 a.m., I called the police. Detective Rachel Kwan of the Knoxville Police Department arrived at my house at 8:30 a.m. She was young, mid-30s, with the sharp, impatient focus of someone who'd chosen homicide investigations because she couldn't tolerate unsolved problems. I showed her the laptop. I showed her the folder. I showed her the safe in the basement with Vivian's biological samples. Detective Kwan watched the video of Vivian. She listened to the audio recordings. She read the 12-page summary. Then she looked at me and said, "Mr. Callaway, your wife was a better investigator than most of my colleagues. She was a forensic accountant. She was a forensic everything. This folder is the most comprehensive private investigation file I've ever seen. Your wife built a prosecutable case while living inside the crime. Can you use it?
Every word, every file, every sample. We'll need to verify the evidence chain, test the biological samples, and corroborate the financial records. But if what your wife documented is accurate, and everything I've seen suggests it is, Martin and Sandra Gale are looking at embezzlement, money laundering, fraud, and potentially murder. Murder? If the samples show what your wife suspected, her death wasn't cardiac arrest. It was homicide. The word hit me like a physical blow. Homicide. My wife. Murdered. By people who'd eaten at my table, laughed in my living room, hugged me at the funeral. Detective Kwan moved fast. The biological samples were sent to the TBI, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, Forensic Lab, within 24 hours. A team of financial investigators from the State Attorney General's office began reviewing Vivian's evidence. Search warrants were obtained for Martin's personal accounts, Sandra's boutique, and the shell company bank records. But Detective Kwan told me something I wasn't expecting. "Mr. Calloway, I need you to act normal. Go to work. Talk to Martin. Don't change anything about your routine. If Martin suspects we're investigating, he'll destroy evidence, move money, possibly flee. Your wife spent 3 years building this case. I need you to protect it for a few more weeks." You want me to sit across from the man who murdered my wife and pretend nothing's wrong? I know what I'm asking, and I know it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. But your wife did it for 3 years. She sat across from Martin at dinner tables, at company meetings, at holiday parties, knowing what he was doing, knowing what Sandra was doing. And she never flinched. She did it to protect the case. I'm asking you to do the same. For how long? 3 weeks, maybe 4. Until the lab results come back and we can execute the arrests simultaneously.
3 weeks. 21 days of looking at Martin Gale's face and seeing a murderer. 21 days of handshakes and project meetings and casual conversations about weather and football and everything except the fact that he'd stolen $1.8 million and killed the woman I loved. I did it. Because Vivian had done it for 3 years, and if she could carry that weight for 1,095 days, I could carry it for 21. The first day back at work after opening the folder was the worst. I pulled into the Calloway Gale parking lot at 7:45 a.m., the way I always did. Martin's truck was already there. He was always early, always performing the role of dedicated partner. I sat in my car for 5 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, trying to find the version of myself that could walk into that building and smile at the man who'd poisoned my wife. I found it. Not in strength, in Vivian. I imagined her sitting next to me in the passenger seat, the way she used to when we'd drive to job sites together. I imagined her voice, steady and practical. "Go in, Raymond. Shake his hand. Ask about the Henderson project. Talk about the weather. And don't you dare let him see what you know. Not yet. Not until it's finished." I walked in. Martin was in the break room, pouring coffee. He looked up and smiled. "Morning, Raymond. You look better today. Getting some sleep finally?" "Starting to." "Good. Vivian would want you to take care of yourself." Her name in his mouth. The name of the woman he'd killed, spoken with manufactured concern by the man who'd planned it. I felt something volcanic rise in my chest, and I pushed it down the way you push down nausea, with deliberate physical effort. "Yeah," I said. She would. The days blurred together. Each one was a performance. I'd sit in meetings with Martin, discussing budgets and timelines, and I'd hear the recordings playing underneath his words like a second track. He'd say, "The Henderson project is coming in $30,000 under budget." And I'd hear, "Hearts stop, doctors sign certificates." He'd say, "I'll handle the vendor payments this week." And I'd hear, "I've moved $430,000 this quarter through Apex and Meridian." Every invoice he processed, I now knew was potentially fraudulent. Every vendor payment he approved, I questioned. Every number he reported, I heard Vivian's, that quiet sound of suspicion that I'd spent 37 years ignoring. I started keeping my own notes. Not evidence, Detective Kwan had that handled, but personal observations. Martin's behavior, his mood, his schedule. When he arrived, when he left, who he called. I wrote them in a notebook I kept in my truck, the same way Vivian had kept her evidence in a locked office. I noticed things I'd missed for decades. Martin taking calls in the parking lot, walking away from the building so he couldn't be overheard. Martin working late on Fridays, the day before Sandra's boutique closed for weekly inventory reconciliation. Martin's mood shifting when I mentioned Vivian's name, a flicker of something behind his eyes that I used to interpret as grief, but now recognized as calculation. He wasn't sad about Vivian's death. He was monitoring my reaction to it, measuring how much I suspected, calibrating his performance. On day 12, something happened that nearly broke my composure. Sandra came to the office. She brought lunch, homemade sandwiches, and a thermos of soup. She did this occasionally, the dutiful partner's wife feeding the team. She set up the food in the break room and called everyone in. I stood in the doorway and watched Sandra arrange plates on the counter. The same hands that had administered digoxin to my wife were now spreading napkins and pouring soup. The same woman who had discussed my wife's poisoning schedule with clinical precision was now smiling and asking if anyone wanted mayonnaise. "Raymond, I made your favorite, turkey and Swiss on rye, just the way Vivian used to make it." I looked at the sandwich. I looked at Sandra, and every cell in my body screamed. "I'm not hungry," I said, "but thank you." I walked to my truck and sat there for 20 minutes, breathing. The notebook was on the passenger seat. I picked it up and wrote, "Day 12. Sandra brought food. I declined. I will decline every time. Vivian didn't have that option. She ate what they gave her because she didn't know. I know, and I will never eat anything that woman touches again." On day 18, Detective Kwan called. "Lab results are in. Positive for digoxin. Chronic exposure 18 to 24 months. Mr. Calloway, your wife was right about everything." I'd known she was right. I'd known since I opened the folder. But hearing it confirmed, hearing a scientist validate what Vivian had suspected and documented and endured alone, hit me harder than I expected. I pulled over to the side of the road and cried. Not the quiet grief I'd been carrying for months. The howling, ragged grief of a man who just learned that his wife's death was a murder and that she'd known it was coming and hadn't told him because she loved him too much to burden him with the truth. "We're ready to move," Detective Kwan said. "Arrests will be simultaneous. Martin at the office, Sandra at the boutique. Thursday morning. Can you be at work at your normal time?" "I'll be there." "Mr. Calloway, you've been extraordinary. Your wife would be proud." "My wife would have done it better."
I'm not sure that's possible. I didn't tell Martin. I went to work on Wednesday, day 20, the last day, and sat across from him at our shared conference table and discussed project timelines and client meetings and material costs. And I smiled and I nodded, and I performed the role of an oblivious partner for the last time. At the end of the day, Martin stopped me in the parking lot. "Hey, Raymond, I know this year's been hell, but I want you to know I'm here. Whatever you need. We built this thing together, and I'm not going anywhere." He put his hand on my shoulder. The hand of a thief. The hand of a murderer. The hand that had signed the checks that paid for the poison that killed my wife. "Thanks, Martin," I said. "That means a lot." 24 hours later, he was in handcuffs. Martin and Sandra Gale were arrested on a Thursday morning. Martin was at the office, our office, the one we'd shared for 28 years. Two detectives walked in at 9:15 a.m. I was at my desk. Martin was at his. The detectives showed their badges, and Martin looked at me. "Raymond, what's going on?" I didn't answer. I just watched. The way Vivian had watched for 3 years. Quietly. Completely. "Martin Gale, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, money laundering, and the murder of Vivian Calloway." Martin's face went through stages. Confusion. Recognition. And then something I'd never seen in 28 years of friendship. Naked, undisguised terror. The terror of a man who'd been caught by a dead woman. "Raymond, this is a mistake. Vivian was my friend. I would never—" "She recorded you, Martin. In my kitchen. You said, 'Hearts stop. Doctors sign certificates. Nobody asks questions.' You said she was being managed. You discussed her death like a business expense." Martin stopped talking. He looked at the detectives. He looked at me. And for the first time since I'd known him, he had nothing to say. Sandra was arrested simultaneously at Maison Sandra. The boutique was seized as part of the money laundering investigation. Every garment, every receipt, every dollar that had passed through that store was evidence. The trial took 3 weeks. Courtroom 4B, Knox County Criminal Court. Judge Patricia Harmon presiding. The prosecution was led by Assistant DA Michael Trent, a career prosecutor who'd handled financial crimes for 15 years, but had never, he told me later, seen a case file as comprehensive as Vivian's. "Your wife didn't just build a case," Trent said during our first meeting. "She built a prosecution. I've seen law firms with 10 partners produce weaker evidence packages than what one woman assembled on a laptop in her home office." The prosecution's case was built almost entirely on Vivian's folder, the same 47 files she'd organized on a laptop that she'd programmed to open 6 months after her death. The first week focused on the financial crimes. Expert witnesses, forensic accountants from the TBI, walked the jury through the shell companies, the fraudulent invoices, the money laundering through Maison Sandra. They used Vivian's own analysis as the roadmap, following her methodology step by step. One of the TBI accountants, a woman named Dr. Lisa Park, told the court, "In 26 years of forensic work, I have never encountered a more thorough private investigation. Mrs. Calloway's documentation meets or exceeds the evidentiary standards we use in our lab. Every transaction is verified, every connection is sourced, every conclusion is supported by multiple forms of evidence." Martin's defense attorney, a man from Atlanta named Philip Corso, who charged $800 an hour, tried to challenge the financial evidence. He argued that the shell companies were legitimate subcontractors, that the payments were real, that the boutique's revenue was genuine. The prosecution put Sandra's own accountant on the stand. Under questioning, the accountant admitted that he'd been instructed by Sandra to adjust revenue figures to reflect anticipated future sales, a euphemism for inflating income with laundered money. He'd done it because Sandra paid him well and because he didn't ask questions. He was granted limited immunity in exchange for his testimony. The second week focused on the murder. The TBI toxicologist, Dr. James Chen, presented the lab results. Vivian's hair samples showed chronic digoxin exposure, consistent with repeated doses over 18 to 24 months. Her stored urine samples confirmed the presence of digoxin metabolites. The food samples she'd collected from 2 dinner parties tested positive for trace amounts of digoxin. The exposure pattern is inconsistent with accidental ingestion or self-administration, Dr. Chen testified. The doses were calibrated to cause progressive cardiac damage without triggering immediate alarm. This is consistent with deliberate, sustained poisoning by someone with knowledge of cardiac pharmacology.
Sandra's pharmacy technician background was presented in detail. Employment records from Walgreens showed she'd worked in a pharmacy with direct access to digoxin for 7 years. Inventory logs showed minor discrepancies in digoxin stock during her final 2 years of employment, discrepancies that were noted but never investigated. And then the jury heard the audio recordings, all 11, played in sequence. Martin's voice and Sandra's voice, captured by a woman they were actively killing, preserved on a laptop they didn't know existed, played in a courtroom they never expected to see. The courtroom was silent during the recordings. Jurors took notes. Some of them stopped writing and simply stared at the speakers. Recording 3. Hearts stop. Doctors sign certificates. Nobody asks questions. Caused one juror to put her hand over her mouth. Recording 9. The dosage conversation. Caused another juror to close his eyes and shake his head. And they watched Vivian's video. The same video I'd watched at 3 a.m. on a September night. My wife looking directly into the camera, calm and afraid, telling the truth she couldn't tell me while she was alive. The jury watched a dead woman testify against her killers. Several jurors cried. The defense objected to the emotional impact. Judge Harmon overruled. The witness is unavailable for live testimony because the defendants killed her, the judge said. The video stands. The defense argued that Vivian was paranoid, that the audio was taken out of context, that the digoxin exposure could have been accidental. The prosecution dismantled each argument with the precision of a forensic accountant, because that's exactly what Vivian had been. She hadn't just collected evidence. She'd anticipated the defense and preemptively destroyed it. In the folder, there was a file I haven't mentioned yet. File 46, labeled Anticipated Defenses. Vivian had written a 4-page document predicting exactly what Martin's lawyers would argue and providing counter-evidence for each. Defense. The audio recordings were taken out of context. Vivian's counter. Recording 3 contains a 14-minute unbroken conversation. The context is the conversation itself. Martin discusses my death as a business timeline. Sandra discusses the poisoning schedule. There is no innocent context for these statements. Defense. The digoxin exposure was accidental or self-administered. Vivian's counter. I have no prescription for digoxin. I have no cardiac condition requiring digoxin. My medical records confirm this. Sandra Gale worked as a pharmacy technician at Walgreens from 2005 to 2012 and had direct access to cardiac glycosides. I have included her employment records and the pharmacy's inventory logs showing discrepancies in digoxin stock during her tenure. Defense. Vivian Calloway was paranoid and fabricated evidence. Vivian's counter. I am a certified forensic accountant with 26 years of professional experience. I have testified as an expert witness in 14 fraud cases, all of which resulted in convictions. My professional reputation, methodology, and evidence standards are documented and can be verified through the Tennessee Board of Accountancy
and the court records of the cases listed in Appendix D. She'd even anticipated the character attack. She knew they'd call her crazy. She knew they'd try to paint her as a paranoid wife making accusations. And she'd preemptively established her professional credentials, her methodology, and her track record of being right. Vivian fought this case from beyond the grave with more skill than most living prosecutors could manage.
Martin Gale was found guilty of embezzlement, $1.8 million, money laundering, fraud, and second-degree murder. Sandra Gale was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering, and fraud. The sentencing hearing was 2 weeks later. The courtroom was full. Employees of Callaway Gale who'd learned their company had been robbed, friends who'd learned their dinner parties had been crime scenes, and David and Claire sitting in the front row holding hands. I gave a victim impact statement. I stood at the podium with Vivian's reading glasses in my pocket. I've been carrying them since the night I opened the folder. And I spoke to the court about what it means to lose someone twice. The first time I lost Vivian was on March 14th, when she died on our kitchen floor. I grieved a wife who I believed had died of natural causes. I grieved the randomness of it, the injustice of a healthy woman's heart just stopping. The second time I lost Vivian was on September 14th, when I opened her laptop and learned that her death wasn't random. It wasn't natural. It was planned, executed, and concealed by two people who sat at our table and ate food she cooked and laughed at jokes she told, and then went home and discussed how long it would take for the poison to finish its work. The second loss was worse, because the second loss came with the knowledge that I could have prevented it. My wife tried to tell me. For years, she tried. She asked questions. She raised concerns. She watched. And I dismissed her. Every time. Because Martin was my friend. Because I trusted him more than I trusted the woman who loved me. I will carry that for the rest of my life. Not just the grief of losing Vivian. The guilt of not listening when she needed me to hear her. Martin was sentenced to 35 years. Sandra received 22 years. Neither showed remorse. Martin looked at me as the verdict was read and mouthed 3 words. She set me up. No, Martin. She didn't set you up. She documented what you did. There's a difference. A setup is a trap. What Vivian built was a mirror. She held it up to your life and showed the world what was behind the smile. After the trial, I sat alone in the courtroom for 20 minutes. Everyone had filed out. The lawyers, the reporters, the families. The room was empty except for me and the ghost of a case that a dead woman had built. I pulled Vivian's reading glasses from my pocket. They were small, gold-framed, the kind she wore when she was reviewing documents late at night. I put them on the table in front of me. You did it, Viv, I said to the empty room. You got them. The glasses sat on the table, catching the courtroom light. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt her beside me. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, as a presence. The particular warmth of a woman who never stopped fighting, even after her heart stopped beating. The state helped me recover the stolen funds. The process took months. Forensic accountants, colleagues of Vivian's, some of whom had worked with her and were personally devastated by the case, traced every dollar through the shell companies, the boutique, and Martin's personal accounts. The shell companies were dissolved. Maison Sandra was liquidated. Every garment, every fixture, every piece of inventory sold at auction. Martin's personal assets were seized. His house, his cars, his investment accounts. Over $1.4 million was returned to Callaway Gale Construction. Not all of it. Roughly $400,000 had been spent and couldn't be recovered, but enough to stabilize the company, cover the legal costs, and keep the 23 employees who'd been unknowing victims of Martin's theft for nearly a decade. I renamed the company. It's now called Callaway Construction. No hyphen, no Gale. Just my name, the way it should have been from the beginning. The sign out front is new, dark blue with gold lettering, the colors Vivian always said made a business look trustworthy. I had them add a small line underneath the company name. Founded 1995. Rebuilt 2024. David moved back to Knoxville. He left his software job in Nashville, voluntarily without me asking, and joined the company. He handles the technology, the accounting systems, the digital infrastructure that Vivian would have loved and Martin would have hated, because modern accounting systems make theft nearly impossible.
I'm doing what Mom would have done, David told me on his first day, making sure no one can ever steal from you again. Claire drives from Chattanooga every other weekend. She brings her husband, Thomas, and their daughter, Vivian Rose, born 3 months after the trial, named for the grandmother she'll never meet, but will always know. Claire reads to Vivian Rose from the same books Joan loved. The cycle continues. Stories saving people, generation after generation. David and Claire came home the week after the verdict, before David's permanent move. We sat in Vivian's office, the 3 of us, in the room where she'd built her case, and I showed them the complete folder. Every file, every recording, every piece of evidence their mother had spent 3 years assembling, while cooking dinner, attending school plays, helping Claire plan her wedding, and living a life that looked normal from the outside, but was anything but. Claire cried. David was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Mom was the strongest person who ever lived, and we didn't even know." "She didn't want us to know," I said. "She was protecting us." "From Martin?" "From the truth. She knew that if we found out while she was alive, we'd react. We'd confront Martin. We'd tip him off. We'd destroy the case she was building. So she built it alone, in secret, in this room, while we lived our lives on the other side of that door." Claire picked up Vivian's reading glasses from the desk. She held them like a relic. "How did she do it, Dad? How did she carry all of this and never show it?" "Because she was a forensic accountant. She spent her career examining lies. She knew how to look at something rotten and keep a straight face. She did it professionally for 30 years. She did it personally for 3. David asked a question I'd been asking myself for months. "Dad, do you think she knew she was going to die?" "I think she knew it was possible. The folder wasn't called When Something Happens to Me. It was called If. She was hoping she'd survive long enough to present the evidence herself. She was hoping the poisoning would stop, or that she'd find a way to neutralize the threat without dying. But she prepared for the worst case, because that's who she was. She prepared for everything. Everything except telling me. That's the one thing she couldn't bring herself to do. And I understand why. I would have confronted Martin. I would have raged. I would have destroyed the case and possibly put her in more danger. She made the right call. I just wish she hadn't had to make it alone. We sat in that office until midnight. The laptop was open. The folder was on the screen, and the 3 of us, a father and his 2 children, grieved not just the woman we'd lost, but the war she'd fought without us. Today it's been 5 months since the trial. The house on Lakeview Terrace is quieter now, but not empty. David lives in the guest house out back, the one Vivian had designed with a separate entrance, as if she'd known someone would eventually need it.
Claire visits with Vivian Rose, and the house fills with the sound of a baby discovering the world. The same walls, the same rooms, the same light through the windows that Vivian had designed to let in as much sun as possible because she said, "A house should feel alive, even when it's quiet." Vivian's office is no longer closed. I go in there every morning. I sit in her chair. I open her laptop, the same laptop that woke me up at 3:07 a.m., and I look at the folder. I don't open the files anymore. I don't need to. I know every word, every number, every recording by heart. I look at the folder name, 5 words on a screen. If something happens to me.
And I think about the woman who wrote those words, who sat in this chair, in this room, knowing she might be dying, knowing who was doing it, and choosing to build a case instead of running, choosing evidence over escape, choosing to protect her family from the truth until the truth could protect itself. Vivian was not a victim. She was a weapon. The quietest, most devastating weapon I've ever seen. She dismantled a $1.8 million fraud, exposed a murder plot, and convicted 2 people, all from a laptop that she programmed to open after her death. She did it because she loved me. She did it because she loved David and Claire. She did it because she was a forensic accountant who refused to let the numbers lie. If you're watching this, and someone you love has concerns about a person in your life, a partner, a friend, a business associate, listen to them. Don't dismiss it. Don't call it paranoia. Don't brush it off because the person they're worried about is someone you trust. Vivian tried to tell me for years. The at dinner, the questions about invoices, the careful watching. She was screaming in a language I didn't speak, and I didn't learn it until she was gone. Listen to the people who love you. They see things you can't, and sometimes the evidence they leave behind is the only thing that saves you. I'm Raymond Calloway. I'm 63 years old. My wife's laptop opened at 3 a.m., 6 months after she died. On the screen was a folder that contained the truth about my best friend, my business partner, and the woman who poisoned my wife at my own dinner table.
Vivian built the case. I finished it. And Martin Gale is spending the next 35 years understanding that you don't steal from a forensic accountant and get away with it. Not even after she's dead. Especially not after she's dead. If this story touched you, leave a comment below. Tell me what you think Vivian would say if she could see us now. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about family, truth, and the people who protect us from beyond the grave. Before we close, this story, like all stories on this channel, contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and educational purposes. If this type of content isn't for you, that's completely okay. Take care of yourselves. But if you stayed until the end, thank you. Vivian would have liked you. She always appreciated people who paid attention to the details. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go check the roses. Vivian planted them along the front walkway. They bloom every spring, red as cardinals, stubborn as the woman who planted them. Some things refuse to die, even when you try to kill them.